Welcome back to Tales and Fails Miniatures. Recently, I found a couple of these really cool exotic miniatures that are a little bit different than some of the normal miniatures that I see. And I really liked them, but I didn't like the bases that they were on, and a couple of their weapons were a little bent. So I thought I'd show you guys how I swapped them out, maybe add a little bit of dry brush, fix their weapons, and yeah, pretty excited about it. So let's get into it. Starting off here, I just wanted to look at the miniatures. As you can see, they're still all on their black bases, so the first step to do was to remove them from their bases, which we will start with the wolf. I very gently just start pulling and prying without trying to break the miniature itself, and slowly just wiggle it back and forth until the legs begin to pop off, as you can see here. This one's pretty simple compared to the other ones. They just had these little pegs with the super glue holding them in, and you just pop those out. The next one I wanted to move on to was this fire one, because this one's a little bit more difficult. You really have to just push back and forth. I even ended up grabbing some pliers here and trying to break the bottom off because there was a lot more super glue on this one holding it together. Even the pliers didn't really work. I just ended up accidentally breaking the miniature away from the fire, which is never fun, but sometimes it happens and you can always just fix that again later. Kept prying and using those pliers to try to break the base off, still couldn't really get it, so I ended up moving over to an X-Acto knife just to slide it underneath the fire and start cutting away the super glue. This seemed to work a lot better. Once I got the first little piece, it was a lot easier to get the second piece because I could slide the X-Acto knife in that gap that I made, and then the fire just popped right off. Unfortunately, again, I broke it off the fire, so I do have to super glue that back on, but I'll handle that later. Moving on to the last one here, the Centaur. This one was probably the easiest. All I had to do was cut the feet off of the bottom of it using the X-Acto, just making sure that I press it up against the base to where I don't actually damage the miniature itself. The last bit holding it onto the base here was this acrylic rod, so I tried pulling it out of its little socket, but unfortunately it just broke, but no big deal there. I will fix that again later. Now that all of the miniatures are off their bases, it was time to pick new bases for them. I knew I wanted to go clear, so I found these that have acrylic rods with the holes in the center for the Centaur, and just trying to match it up, make sure it's going to actually fit on there and look okay. And I realized that the acrylic rod's probably not going to work for that one. And then I grabbed the bigger base here for the wolf, which seemed to fit perfectly on there. And then I didn't have any other clear bases, which I thought I had more, but no big deal. I just grabbed one of the smaller ones that has the acrylic rod, and I decided that I'm going to use that for the fire wielder. But now that all of the bases were picked out, I wanted to try to figure out what I was going to do with this Centaur. Again, these ones came with extra acrylic rods, and they were about the same size as the acrylic rod that was in this one, so I just broke that off and then took the Dremel and really made a hole that would fit the new one a little bit better. And here you just want to be as gentle as possible to not slip and hurt the paint or anything on the miniature. So I just took it really slow and tested it back and forth, widened out the hole, and then I also realized that I was not going at the correct angle for this once I started putting it in, so I had to hollow it out in the other direction to make the acrylic rod fit, which at this point it slides right in the right angle. And after that, just sliding this base up to make sure that it actually sat correctly, which it did. And so I wanted to move on to fixing the other fire wielder miniature here so that it could have time to dry before I started trying to base it as well. And the biggest thing with this was just to make sure that the super glue did not get on the fire, or else it would leave streak marks. So I just gently pushed it into place, trying to avoid touching anything except where it actually mounts. And then right there it clicks into place, and now it can just sit off to the side and dry. While the fire wielder was sitting off to the side drying, I decided to move on to the elf riding the wolf, which was probably the easiest one because all I had to do was, with my pair of plastic clips, is cut the pegs off of the bottom and just try to make this as smooth as possible so it has the most surface area to actually connect to the base. And once I had cut all of those off, I realized that they still weren't perfectly flat, so I came in with my Dremel with a sanding bit on it just to sand those down to make sure they were as flat as possible so they had the most surface area to be glued onto the base. And once they were flat, I just took some gel super glue. I like this because it just doesn't go everywhere, especially when you're working with clear bases. It really just sticks exactly where you want it to, just to where you don't have a bunch of white streaks on your clear bases. And once I had the amount of super glue I wanted, I just lined it up very gently and dropped it into place, and then pushed it off to the side to allow it dry as well. And now that the fire wielder had had time to dry, I lined it up on its base, took some super glue, put it in the center because the fire does overhang the base just slightly, and then same thing. Put it very gently, lining it up, and then pushing it off to the side to let it dry as well. The final step with the basing here was to glue the acrylic rod into the centaur's stomach where I made that hole, and this was just, again, sliding it in there, making sure that you don't put too much super glue or else it will all spew out, and then sliding the base on here, which of course I just pulled the acrylic rod right back out, but all you have to do is just put it back in and then put some super glue in the spot where it's going to connect after pulling the ring down. Once the super glue is on, just push it right back into place and everything's clean. The next thing I wanted to do to these miniatures was to straighten out their weapons since they were all a little bent. So in the right cup I have boiling water, and then in the left cup I have ice water. That was actually a recommendation from one of my subscribers, so thank you for that. But all you have to do is just dip it in the boiling water for just a few seconds, make sure you don't burn yourself obviously, and then once it is nice and movable, you just put it in the position that you want, and then just barely dip it into the cold water, which should harden it back up so that it won't move. And here you really do not need to put it in the ice water for too long, as you can tell. Just a quick dip and they are nice and firm again to where it doesn't move and it's in position and looks much better than it did previously. This wolf was much worse than the centaur, so I just, again, dip it in and then move it over into the correct position, dip it in the cold water, and repeat this step for the other one as well. And now that I've done that, all these weapons look much nicer, very straight, which again just helps with the realism of these. And make sure to be careful when going to dump out that boiling water again, and then dry off all the miniatures for the next step. The final thing I wanted to do here was just go through and help some of these details pop. So on this first miniature, the fire spinner, I took a very light silver and went through and dry brushed all of the high areas across the entire miniature, making sure to get down in all the crevices anywhere that the light would hit and just hit the top edges of those. And you can see here, it just helps make the miniature look a little bit more realistic rather than all being one tone. And I think it really helped right there on the bottom where you can really see all of the nice edges popping out more. But on the top, I decided that it was a little bit still one color. So I went back with a Nuln Oil and just kind of dabbed small areas to make it look a little bit more used. And while doing this, just be careful not to touch the fire because it would just look really weird with black ink all over the fire. So just stick it only on the metal. And again, I was just dabbing this just to help give it that little bit more used look. On the Wolf Rider, it really just didn't need a whole lot, but all of the armor was just painted silver. There was no wash or anything put on it, so I did go in with that same Nuln Oil and just very gently dabbed and let it fall into all the crevices to give that armor just a little bit more detail and depth. And then once you have gone through and coated the whole thing, just take a wet paintbrush, which I used the same one here, but I went back with it just being wet and just dabbed up any areas where it pooled a little bit too much. And with that, these are all finished and we move on to B-roll. Alright, so as you can see, it's not that difficult to swap out bases. I personally just like the clear bases. I think they look more realistic on a battle map with a clear base compared to a black one. I think it just draws away from the miniature a little bit when they have a black base. But I think all three of these turned out phenomenal. And again, when it comes to the weapons, not very hard. A little bit of boiling water, a little bit of ice water. Just stick it in there, put it in the position you want, and then dip it into the ice water, and they come out exactly wherever you had them shaped. I just think that's another thing that just makes them look so much more realistic compared to having super bent weapons, which just draws away from the realism as well. And adding a little bit of a dry brush here and there or a wash like I did on this one, I feel like just helps details pop out and makes them look a lot better than just having like silver armor or a dark silver wheel. I just think it adds so much to do such a simple step. So I think these all turned out phenomenal. I hope you guys think the same. If you did like this, please do like and subscribe, and we will catch you in the next one. Cheers.